So yes, this whole talk on what is the meaning of friendship, or the real meaning of friendship, comes from a quote from the Buddha. So the Buddha said something about friendship that since then we in Triratna have been exploring, have been practicing, have been trying to understand what this quote is, and other traditions may have been as well. But it's one of those quotes that the Buddha said, and it seems to have gone over some of the traditions. Some traditions haven't really explored it, and some have. And we're one of those traditions that have gone, okay, what did he mean by that? And this is a quote, and you may know it because it's a really famous quote. And it comes from the Buddha's cousin, Ananda. And Ananda says, he's inspired one day, and Ananda goes to the Buddha and says, isn't it amazing? Isn't it wonderful? Spiritual friendship is half of the spiritual life. And the Buddha says, say not so, Ananda, say not so, i.e., no, that's not right. Spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. So if you've heard that quote before, I'd like you to just think, well, do you get that? Are you living that? How much of that do you really understand? And if you've not heard that quote before, then how is it landing now? Are you going, obviously that's true, or are you going, I don't understand the quote? For me, when I first heard, and I actually remember sitting in a class many years ago, I was pretty new to Buddhism. I'd been meditating for a while. I was still trying to figure it all out. I was sitting in a class, and I was sort of like, I know if you're in a class, you're sort of sometimes half there, sometimes thinking about something else. And I was in one of those, and I heard the quote, and I thought, yeah, Ananda. I heard Ananda saying, oh, yes, spiritual friendship is a half of spiritual life. I remember going, yeah. And I was really surprised, even a bit shocked, when I heard the Buddha say, it's the whole of the spiritual life. I thought, well, how can that be? Where's meditation? Where's teachings? Where's all this other stuff? I don't get, how is friendship, spiritual friendship, the whole of the spiritual life? And then I thought to myself, well, what is spiritual friendship anyway? Because I was fairly new, and I had my good friends outside, and then I had the people I was meditating with, who I didn't really know that well. I knew a few of them, but not really very well. And I thought, well, are these my spiritual friends? Even if I don't know them that well, even if they're nothing like me, because in where I was, it was a very small centre. It wasn't this one. So there weren't many young people there. I was from London. It wasn't, there was just not many, it wasn't very diverse. It was lots of differences, lots of things that I thought, well, they're not like me, the people here. So how can they be my spiritual friends? And what about my other friends outside who I really like, I trust and like, and they know me and they know all about me, and I have a laugh with them, and I can tell them everything, mostly, although I couldn't tell them very much about my meditation, of course, because whilst they were okay with meditating, they didn't really want to know that much about it. I went on retreat, I wouldn't come back on retreat and say, hey, well, this happened and then that happened. And if I tried to do that, they'd quite quickly glaze over and then go, all right, and want to bring a different topic on. So I was confused. I was confused when I heard this statement, because I thought, well, I can talk to these people in the class about my meditation and about my retreats, but they don't know much else about the rest of my life. And then with my friends outside, they know a lot about the rest of my life, my family, my work, and my personality and all of that. But I can't really talk to them about what really also matters to me, which is meditation and trying to understand what's going on in my mind. So it was quite a confusing quote when I heard it, but it stuck with me, and I just thought, I really want to understand it. What did the Buddha mean? So eventually I stuck around and got to know a few people in the class, and there were some other young people, young women like myself, so we just sort of hung out a bit together, and eventually I actually started, I moved and I lived in the same building as a couple of them, so we used to just see each other a bit more. And we began to share with each other what our meditation was, and what do you think about this, and what do you think about that. We were definitely learning from each other. Like, none of us knew anything more than the others, really, and they weren't, in the center I was, there weren't any actually experienced women that we could go and talk to. So we were leaning on each other and supporting each other in our practice. So that was really helpful. And what's interesting now, some of those people are still around many years later. And I saw one of them at the weekend that I just came back from, and I hadn't seen her for years. And what was really interesting, that even though our lives took different paths, the fact is we have this strong bond. And it was something about being an experience together where we had to rely on each other. We didn't really know what we was doing, but it was a really pivotal time in all our lives. Very transformative time in our lives, because we were really trying to put meditation into practice and change our lives. And now there's a really strong bond, even though we don't see each other from one year to the next. So there was something special about that time. But eventually, I realised I needed to be around more people. I wanted to be around a bigger situation where I could meet different kind of people, and and also more experienced people as well. So I moved to London, which is where I'm originally from anyway. And in fact, I'd seen a woman who I thought she was a Caribbean woman, and I thought, I want to know who she is. And I sort of that's my cultural background. I thought, there's a Caribbean woman involved. Okay, so I'm not the only Caribbean woman, but that's interesting. So I spotted her. And I basically hung around the centre a bit to come into different classes, and I saw that she taught lunchtime classes. So I basically did a lunchtime class. She was there. Her name is Mudita Shri. And, she came out of the class, and I just went up to her and introduced myself and said, my name is, and, I've been practicing this, like a little bio, And she kind of listened. And then I said, well, do you fancy meeting up one day? And she was like, yes. And I was so relieved, because she didn't sort of like look at me weirdly or anything like that. She really sort of said yes. And she became a very good friend, actually, and really sort of took me under her wing a bit, showed me a little bit about what it's like living a Buddhist life, because I didn't really know. I didn't really have anything to go on, apart from the friends who started their journeys with me. So she showed me a bit about what it's like to live a Buddhist life. Then she introduced me to other people as well, another Buddhist friend another Buddhist friend of hers who's very close. So suddenly I had two people I knew who were experienced Buddhist, who seemed to take a bit of an interest in me, and I was interested in them. And it made quite a significant difference to me, because Mudita Shri, she was teaching here at the centre, but also she had a very full-on job. I think she was like a forensic expert in courts. So when there were big court hearings, she would go and deliver all this expert information and knowledge. And then she'd be back at the class teaching the Metta Bhavana, which we did this evening. And I was like, wow, you can have a really responsible job and be a meditator. You can be a Buddhist and be really engaging with some really serious things in life. And I don't know, for some reason I hadn't equated the two things. And then she introduced me to another friend of hers who was a health visitor. And again, the health visitor, she would tell me about how she'd been practicing the Metta Bhavana in the morning, and how it really helped her with her clients. And when she had difficult clients and challenging situations, she'd really be looking at her reactions. She'd put it in her Metta Bhavana, and it sort of showed me, oh, okay, you can join it all up. It doesn't have to be oneself as a Buddhist, meditating separately to what goes on with the rest of your life. And that was really, really important to me, because I was still figuring out really how to live and how to make sense of the path that I was on, and what difference it would actually make to my life. And so I actually got actual examples of it from meeting them. So already I've sort of spoken about two types of friendships there. There's a sort of horizontal friendship, we call it, which is like your peer friendship, people who are at roughly the same stages of you, who you can learn from and get to know, not learn from, but learn with and get to know. And then those vertical friendships, which are people much further ahead than you, who can guide you really, and who can sort of take an interest in helping you grow. So two types of friendships. Just hang on a minute. So yes, I was reflecting for even as I was developing these friendships, I was very much reflecting still about, well, what is spiritual friendship and how does it differ to the friendships I have outside the Sangha? Because I really valued and still value friendships that I have elsewhere. So I was like, what is the actual difference between them? And really the key difference is, I realised quite early on, it's not that I'm necessarily having more fun with my Buddhist friends. It's not necessarily that. It wasn't like it wasn't fun either, but it wasn't that. I realised quite quickly. But the real difference was that I could see, well, my Buddhist friends were what we had in common, and sometimes all that we had in common was the fact that we wanted to grow and develop using meditation and all the different practices. That's what it was. And as a result, I had a space for exploring those aspects of me with them in a way that I just didn't have in the same way with my non-Buddhist friends. So there was very much a thing that we're learning together, we're learning from, we're sharing ourselves based on common set of values and common goals, and we're trying to figure that out, all of us together actually. Even those who were further than me, I could see that they were also very much committed to their learning, and they were growing and they were figuring things out, in a different way to what I was. So that was the key real difference. I could see with my more developed friends, if you like, that they were a bit more self-aware than I was. They were certainly a bit more, Mudita Shri, for example, she would really spend time thinking about her speech. She was very sort of intentional about her communication. And that sort of impressed me, because in my other life, we would just say whatever came to our heads, and that was that. And it's only if it was really, somebody got upset that you'd actually think about it. Otherwise, it was, you just said whatever. Whereas I could see in Mudita Shri, she was very intentional, very purposeful in how she communicated. That was one thing I really noticed. And yeah, she'd also really listen to what I was saying as well. And again, I didn't always experience that with some of my other friends. I would talk and they go, oh, that happened to me as well. And then they would go off on their story and I'd be like, oh, okay. That's the end of that conversation. Whereas again, what I found with this sort of, intentional friendships, that they would like, oh, I don't understand. Would you like to say more? She'd often say it to me, say more, Suryagupta. I'd be like, I don't know what else to say. But she would create the space where I'd be like, okay, what else do I want to say? Okay, what else is here? So I was discovering myself in relationship to these other friends, my Buddhist friends, my new Buddhist friends. So yes, the word for friendship, spiritual friendship, is Kalyana Mitrata. Kalyana Mitrata, and Kalyana means lovely. It means good. Mitrata means friendship. And there's other word when the spiritual life. So what the Buddha actually says is that say not so, Ananda, say not so. Spiritual friendship is the whole of brahmacharya. That's actually the word he uses, brahmacharya. And Brahma has a few different meanings. I discovered. So Brahma means noble. It means sort of noble, beautiful, divine even, exquisite. So this is quite an interesting thing. So thinking about the spiritual life as being divine, noble, exquisite. And charya means walking, practicing with. So in a way, I kind of thought, let's think about something that divine. Often we think of divine as heavenly, but actually we also say things like, oh, that cake was divine, you know. Well, I do. I don't know about you. And when we're thinking about a divine, something like that is kind of like, it's very rich, isn't it? And every ingredient, you know, is as a quality ingredient, yes? It's very rich, it's very quality, and it's nourishing. When you have something that's divine, you want it, but actually you don't need too much of it, do you? Because it fills you, it really satisfies. So it's thinking about the spiritual life in that way, and thinking about spiritual friendship in that way. It's kind of like a spiritual friend, you know, has these qualities, these sort of lovely, but also rich qualities that actually when you meet a friend in the spiritual life, it's very nourishing. You feel full up. And it lasts. The effects of that lasts. And again, we can contrast that when we have communication that's not like that. Yeah, when we have communication where, you know, you might be with a lot of people, but you can come away feeling not very satisfied, feeling a bit empty, feeling a bit like, I've just spent all that time and I actually come back feeling worse. I don't know if you've had those experiences as well. So in a way, what we're trying to do is cultivate contexts and friendships where we come away feeling, yes, deep, our sense of ourselves is deepened, yes? And we have this full sense of who we are, and we have a full sense of our friend. So I was at the weekend, I spent a few days in the countryside with other ordained members, and there's about 100 or so of us. And there were definitely talks and, you know, meditations and different practices we did together. But really, most of the experience was meeting each other over lunch, going for walks. I had this one lovely walk where we thought we were lost at one point, and then the mist was coming down quite heavy and it was getting quite dark, and then we were like, oh my god, are we lost? But we were so enjoying the kind of conversation that we were like, it's going to be fine. We were fine, and it was the whole weekend was just going from one positive communication, one interesting communication. Sometimes it's not that we weren't talking about challenging things. There was definitely a few knotty topics that we were sort of exploring, but even the way we were exploring it was very skillful, was very sort of positive, was very intentional. And there was they actually asked 3 people to come at that weekend who were mitras, who were not yet ordained, to give talks about their personal journey and why they started meditating, but also why they wanted to go further in their practice as well, why they wanted to train for ordination. And it was wonderful having these 3 women there, 2 of whom are from this centre. And they were talking about, and they all talked about someone who'd made a real significant difference to them. So they spoke about their meditation and their growing awareness and how they were working things out in their life with their relationships and their work and things like that, you know, what practice does to your life if you really engage with it. But they also spoke about a friend who had made a real difference in their lives. And it was very, very moving, actually, hearing them speak in this way. And some of the people they spoke about, they didn't know that well. It's just that they were sort of seeing somebody on a retreat or something like that. There was something about that person that just made them see possibility, see something different that they were attracted to. And others, you know, they did know very well, and you know, they'd really helped them in their lives in some way. Yeah, it was very, very moving. And then we were asked, those of us who were listening, to choose in our discussion groups to think about somebody that had made a real difference in our lives. as well. And it was really good just having the opportunity to do so. And for me, and I think for many of us, it was like, oh, there's so many people. And I remembered when I started off in my journey, there wasn't anyone, it was kind of like, I don't really know anyone. I don't know how to get to know people. I don't know how to deepen the connections I have. I was very much in that place for a while. And I had to sort of go up to people in a sense, like I did with my friend Muditashri, and say, hey, will you, can I get to know you, So it was, I remember that phase. So it was lovely also looking back years later and going, oh, my life now is just full of these different connections. And it's been a journey to that. And I realised, well, I have people who I've probably just 2 or 3 people who have known me for a very, very long time. And, they're very close friends, and I'll just say anything. They know all my ups and downs in my life, and definitely have supported me in real challenging times. And there are those who I am very good friends with. I don't see all the time necessarily, or I don't know as long. And there are those who I'm developing friendships with. So it's important not to think of it as like, well, I've got my few friends and that's that, It's kind of like there's always the possibility for connection. There's always a possibility for friendship. And so looking back in that time, looking back on this weekend, I think, gosh, I remember when that wasn't my life. I remember when I was quite dissatisfied and just didn't know how to deepen the connections. And now looking back and thinking, gosh, I put effort in, and now it's kind of a very full experience I have. And I also remember when I thought that Buddhism and doing this journey would be quite a solitary thing. I didn't sort of, you sort of see the Buddha there with his eyes closed or half closed and by himself sitting down, and that's the kind of image you have of practice. And it was a surprise. I actually know it's very full. It can be very full of people, and that's where the growth is. So the Buddha himself, he starts off his life, leaves home, goes off on a solitary journey, whereby he's leaving behind what he knows to try and find the truth. But then, and he's meditating in the jungles by himself, terrified, working with his mind, trying to figure out how to do this thing called find freedom. And then he realizes he needs some teachers. So he finds some teachers. He becomes friends with those teachers. They teach him everything they know. And to the point where they become quite equal. So it starts off in a vertical relationship, and then they become peers, if you like. They sort of equal knowledge, to the point where they say, hey, lead this movement with us. And he says no, because he realizes that he hasn't come to the end of the path. He hasn't really found freedom. So he goes off again on his own. Practices on his own, and eventually decides he's going to practice asceticism. And there's this group of friends who are also doing that as well. So he get another group of friends he really engages with. They probably start off as peers, but then soon he becomes like the leader of this group. And the leader of the group, because he's so determined to find the truth, the point where he really does do extreme things with his body, stand on one leg for hours, doesn't eat, really trying to conquer, his body, master his body, mind over matter, until he collapses one day, and he realizes there's no truth here. He realizes he's got to a dead end, and he starts eating, he starts nourishing his body, he starts looking after himself, and his friends are disgusted with him and reject him, and they go off. So he's alone again. So we have this really interesting, sort of process of him having to really turn to himself. And one of the quotes he says is, be a lamp unto yourself, where he really has to go within, really has to, find his inner resources, and engagement and interaction. So we have this constant with other people, really relationships with other people. So we have this self, other, self, other, all the time. And of course, when he becomes enlightened, he finally breaks through, becomes enlightened, he firstly, we understand, he sits there and gazes at the tree that sheltered him. And he has a deep gratitude for the tree, for the natural world that gave him the conditions to really discover the truth. And then we know that he then wants to share. He naturally wants to share what he's discovered, and then thinks, well, who's ready to hear this? Because he realizes how, what he's had to do to get to that point. And he's like, who can go on this journey? And then he has this vision, which is you see in the pictures behind me, of different people at different stages of growth as lotuses. Lotuses at different stages of growth. Some are buds, some are fully open, and he realizes there are those who are willing to hear, ready to hear his teachings. And he thinks the first people that he wants to share it with are his previous teachers, people that cared for him, supported him in his journey. And then he realizes they've died. So he goes in search of his friends, those ascetic brothers who were in the struggle with him. He goes in search of them. And they, of course, still think he's a loser. So when they see him coming, they basically, don't even look at him, But the image I have was of this great being, peace, its peace is radiating through them, energy. They've got the combination of peace and energy and warmth and love. And as the Buddha moves towards them, they can't help themselves but listen and engage and give him full respect. So I find this really interesting that the Buddha himself, needed other people in a sense. He needed other people for not to find the truth. He very much, did the last stretches of that, but he needed other people to help him on that journey. His teachers, the friends who he fell out with, or they fell out with him, the friends who were on that wrong path. That was all part of his journey. That was all part of his learning. Those challenges that he had, on that stretch of his journey. And then, of course, he's then communicating the experience. And of course, his friends become enlightened. And, he then goes off and teaches other people that he knows, and then sends them all off to teach whoever they encounter. And what you have with the Buddha is this being who forms relationships, who nurtures friendships, who cares for people. It's not a question of he's a teacher like on a megaphone that we'd see these days handing out leaflets and that's that. He's very much like in relationship with others, and the learning happens in those communications, these direct communications. So whether he knows you for a day or a moment, or several years, there's still a relationship there. So yes, this kind of combination of self, other, is definitely sort of key to our journey. We can't do it alone, and yet other people are not going to do it for you. You've still got to work on your mind. You've still got to figure out what one's bringing to practice. But it's in the kind of how those come together that some magic happens, I think, and real learning happens. So there's this other story in the Buddha's life. With a monk called Megya. And Megya is this young monk who's attending the Buddha, basically looking after the Buddha. And they're at this place where there's a beautiful mango grove. And Megya says, it's very hot. And Megya says, wouldn't it be great to meditate over there in the mango grove? But the Buddha's not doing that. So he says, can I go and meditate over there? And it's really cool, and you can just look after yourself, and I'll go and meditate over there. And the Buddha says, just wait until, some other monks come, and then you can go. But Meghe says, no, I really want to go now. Anyway, he says, I really need to practice. I really need to sort myself out. Practice. I've got a lot of work to do. You're already enlightened. You don't need to meditate in the way that I do. So you can stay there whilst I go off to the mango grove. So the Buddha says nothing, probably, I imagine. And Meghe goes off. And he's like, yeah, it's really wonderful here. It's cool. It's refreshing. It's really nice. He sits there to meditate. And what do you imagine happens? Anyone? What do you imagine happens?
He eats one of the mangoes.
He eats all the mangoes. What else? Does he have a good time?
No.
Yeah, you see, you knew. so absolutely, Meghe sits there. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but anyway, he sits there, and at first he's kind of pleased with himself, and then eventually, he starts getting distracted. He starts having all kinds of fantasies. He starts being annoyed with all the other monks. He starts, fear, all kinds of emotions starts happening. And he's trying to work with himself, and it's not working. And eventually, he just gets up, and he goes tail between his legs, as they say, back to the Buddha, and says, I don't know what happened there. I just could not practice. And the Buddha doesn't tell him off, or says, see, he basically says, and he gives him his teaching. And it's a really interesting teaching because he's basically guiding Meghe as to really what you need to live a spiritual life. Because Meghe, he thought he knew, didn't he? He thought he had what he needed and he could go off. But he's really ready now to hear something different from the Buddha. So the Buddha says, first thing you need, he gives him 5 things that he needs to live a spiritual life. And when we say spiritual life, remember we're talking about, the kind of beautiful, the noble, the divine, the exquisite, the rich, the nourishing, the meaningful life. First thing you need is spiritual friendship. So that's interesting, just as it being number 1 on the list. It's not, and by the way, after all these other things, by the way, have a good friend with you. It's not that. It's the first thing you need is spiritual friendship. And that's really important because Meghe thought he could do it by himself. He thought he didn't need anything else. He'd got all he needed and he could go off. So, being in connection with others makes a difference. It has an effect. We are impacted by other people all of the time. We've been impacted by other people for the whole of our lives, for good, for neutral, and the not so good, right? And we'll continue to be impacted by people for the rest of our lives. And we, of course, impact others too in all those ways. So we need, other people. And there's different ways of thinking about friendship. Sometimes we think of friendship as a bit of an exclusive thing, but I like to think of it as, firstly, what we need to do is just be in cultures, in context or communities where there is friendliness, where friendliness is a very strong value. We talk about retreats a lot here, and retreats are a place that you might make a really good friend, absolutely. But first and foremost, a retreat is a community that's come together where friendliness is a very strong value. And it's incredible how people respond to that. I often, beginning a retreat, will just, why have you come and how are you right now? And it's amazing the amount of times people will say, well, obviously the usual things like stress and anxious and, I want to come for a bit of, clarity or figure out what my next thing is in life. All of those things, but people always also come with, I'm disconnected. I want community. Sometimes people come with, I just want connection. So it's really that kind of the communities of friendliness, really where friendliness is a value, you grow in that. You see opportunity. Basically, when there's a culture and a community of friendliness, it basically points you to the positive. You're seeing the positive at all terms. You're seeing somebody open the door for somebody. You're seeing someone say, oh, I'll get that for you. You're seeing somebody take an interest and listen. Every turn there's something positive happening, and suddenly we see the possibilities for ourselves in a way that is so easy to not see that in our ordinary lives. Yeah. So a culture of friendliness really matters, and in that culture of friendliness, the opportunity for friendship is there. It can just grow. And then, of course, you have the specific friendships as well. And as I said before, there's friendships that you're connected to, you're committed to. You think, I want to get to know that particular person. But there's also friendship in potential as well. So at the weekend that I was on, there are people I didn't know there, and I sat and chatted to, and I'm thinking next time I see them, I've got a basis for deepening a connection. And you can do that at the centre here too. So spiritual friendship was the first one that the Buddha said we need. Secondly is ethics. So how we behave, how we act, what we do, the actions we take in the world. And again, what we do has an effect on our minds and has an effect on other people. So I know for myself, I remember going to an event. It was very early on in my journey. There was a big Buddhist event where people were giving talks, and I saw a woman there. She was giving a talk and didn't know her or anything like that. And I thought, this woman has a strong ethical sensibility. Those words just came into my mind. And I don't even know where they came from, because if you'd asked me, what do you think about ethics? I would have been like, well, you've got to be good, but it can also be restrictive and boring. And, I had a very... I thought ethics was definitely a good thing, but I just thought it was also somehow or other, it wouldn't be fun, to be always ethical. So seeing this woman and these words coming to my mind about this woman has real ethical sensibility, and I was so drawn to it. I thought, I want to know what that's like. What is it like to live ethically all of the time? It felt beautiful for me, seeing this woman, and actually just seeing her walk around the space. I thought, I want to know her. I didn't actually get to know her for about 4 years after that, but I did, and she ended up becoming the person who gave me my name, Suryagupta, who ordained me. And that sort of sense of ethical sensibility, I got to know at close hand. I thought I could see the way she made decisions about things, that I thought, oh, there's a fine kind of thinking process that's going on there. She's really thinking about the consequences of her actions and really wanting the consequences to be beneficial. And I, just through watching her, I thought, that's what I want to. And I sort of committed myself to trying to do that more and more. So ethics matters. We have an effect on others, other people have an effect on us. The third one is engaging in serious discussion around the Dharma. Who are we going to do that with? We can think for ourselves about what we think about impermanence or what we think about this, that and the other. But actually, how do we really get to know what we think, really? Because often when we do it by ourselves, we go round and round and we come to a particular standpoint. It's only when we interact with other people we think, oh, I didn't see it like that. And then we're at the Buddhist Center, we have these mitra groups where people are Buddhist and they meet together in groups, and they'll come up with they'll have a theme, and you might hear 10 different ways of looking at the same topic from 10 different people. And then that's so interesting. You think, oh, I thought this was a way to interpret this, but there are 10 other interpretations. And then you've got to think, well, which interpretation is really helpful? Is it mine? Is it somebody else's? Is it a combination of them? So serious discussions with other people. And then the fourth one is practicing self-awareness, of course. We need to keep working on our minds, keep noticing where we've got a negative habit pattern, choosing to do something with that, but also cultivating the positive as well, seeing where we actually act beneficially for ourselves and others, and encouraging ourselves to do that more and more. And then lastly, the last one is having insight into the teaching, really beginning to want to understand something like impermanence. How does impermanence play out in our lives? And again, how can I use that teaching to really live my life in a more meaningful way? So those are the 5 things the Buddha said: spiritual friendship, ethics, discussing the Dharma, practicing self-awareness, and insight into teachings, but all starting with spiritual friendship. So I asked a couple of friends today, I said, listen, I'm giving a talk on friendship, anything you want me to mention, or anything that you're wondering about. And one of my friends says, well, what this all sounds, it's all lovely, it all sounds lovely, doesn't it, spiritual friendship and being with a noble and all that. But what about your other friends that you left that might not be doing this path? How do you relate to them? So I found that a really interesting question, because actually, thinking about one's first duty, if you want to grow and develop, is to your transformation, is to your growth and development. So, your friends can be helpful in that. They can still support you in that, if they're open to that, of course. And you can still support them too. And I think it only becomes a problem or an issue when, that's no longer there. They're no longer supporting you in that process, or somehow being in certain environments, you're noticing a negative effect. Yeah. So in a sense, it's like keep connected to whatever friends you have if you feel there's benefit there. And certainly, we understand there's kind of friendship provides different kinds of benefits. We get a practical benefit from friends. A friend will say, hey, do you want me to do that for you? Or they're generous and they're here, you can share that, or they'll look out for you, they'll speak up for you in different contexts. Any friend can do that. Spiritual friends and our normal friends can do that for us. So we need friendships in general to grow. And friendships definitely have a practical benefit on our lives. They also have a psychological benefit too, because, actually, imagine a life without any friendship at all, without anyone who you could engage in a friendly way with, or any community you could come to where the friendliness wasn't there. It would be a really bleak life. So, and loneliness is such a big thing in our context right now. You can be surrounded by people actually and feel terribly lonely. And there's something about that's particularly all friendships, but spiritual friendships, meaningful friendships, where we can bring aspects, we can share more and more of ourselves. Because I think one of the things that causes us loneliness is when we don't feel we can express who we are, and we keep different aspects of ourselves at bay, and other people are doing that as well. So before you know it, you're in community, you're in a connection with somebody where nothing real is being said. Everything's at the surface, and the real things that you want to say, the real things you want to understand, the real things you want to express can't find space. And then of course we can feel really disconnected and quite lonely sometimes as well. We're not able to be who we are with other people, or be seen or heard. So it's very, very important, that sort of psychological benefits of friendship. We need each other to grow, but we also need each other to feel like we're alive and to discover who we are as well. And of course, a really good friend, and this will definitely get with a spiritual friend, will also hold you accountable to what you say you want to develop. So if you say you want to be kind and you want to be ethical, like I did years ago, I thought I want to be more ethical. Well, my friends will be like, that, and they'll bring up some interesting questions for me sometimes for me to think about, or challenge me perhaps, or actually help me stretch, because there's sometimes we put limits on what we think is possible for us. And I know a friend of mine once said to me, I was kind of complaining about something, and she said, Suryagupta, there's so much more to you than you think, And I remember thinking, wow, is there? It was just like, of course there was, but for some reason, I was just like, what do you mean there's more? And I actually got really excited, because I just thought, well, I don't have to be like I've always been. I can imagine more for myself, yeah? And I can imagine there's more of me. And as soon as I sort of heard that, I had this picture of myself that was just bigger and more expressive and more open and more connected, and I wanted to move towards that. So our friends, our spiritual friends, can remind us of that. So there's really important friendship benefits that we need. So practical, psychological, and spiritual. And if we're having all those things, of course, there's going to be times when the difficulties happen. That was the other friend. One friend said, what do I do about my real friends, my other friends that are not Buddhists? And another friend said to me, Suryagupta, there's conflicts that happen in friendship. How do you deal with the conflicts? How do you deal with things when they're not going well? Whether they're spiritual friends or not spiritual friends, what do you do? And I have to say, it's going to happen, because what we're doing in relationship, we're bringing our different conditioning. We're bringing our different personalities, our temperaments, our habits, our different backgrounds in all different respects. So there's a lot of difference. So if you're really engaging with a friend, you're going to encounter the difference. You're going to encounter the similarities, and you're going to encounter where it's like, oh, that's not how I think. Oh, do you do that? How comes you do that? It's a bit like they say that you only get to know somebody when you travel or live with them, right? Because you suddenly see the differences. And what do we do with these differences? What do we do when, I don't know, we've done something, we know we've upset a friend, or a friend's upset us? In some contexts, when difficulties happen, that's it. You're out. The friendship's over. You don't answer the phone. They call it ghosting. You just suddenly that's it. But in this context, in a spiritual context, if the value is growth and development and transformation, then of course, when the difficulties happen, what can we learn from that? How can we heal that? What healing do I need to go through, or you need to go through, that will help bring harmony again? What do I need to see or let go of? What do I need to speak up more about? You're much more likely to ask good questions that help you find the kind of way forward, rather than abandon and reject. We're not trying to reject anything. We're not trying to reject ourselves or aspects of ourselves. We're not trying to reject others. We're trying to understand and come into a relationship with each other. So that's the value that helps us grow. We will have conflict. There will be difficulties. It's about how we engage with those things that makes the difference. So yes, the conflicts will happen, and it's part of the journey, part of the difference, and one circle keeps expanding all of the time. I said there's two types of friendships: vertical, people who are more experienced than us; horizontal, people who are similar level to us. And there's also the third type of friendship as well, where we are supporting others as well. We are the guide, the light for somebody else. And everybody in this room, if you're meditating, if you've even started thinking about practice and the journey, you can be that for somebody else. There might be somebody who goes, oh gosh, they go on a Monday night, they're so committed, they practice on a Monday night, they're so committed, they go to the Buddhist center, they're meditating. That for somebody else is a whole new journey. So never underestimate what we can be for somebody else. There's always somebody that can benefit from us, as well as there's always somebody that we can be benefited by. So yes, we will encounter difference. And why spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life is because what we're really doing, we're learning about what it is to be human. We're learning about what it is to deal with this thing called being alive, our human conditioning. And our human conditioning that sits alongside or even covers over sometimes our potential to be free, to be loving, to be wise. And we're coming into a relationship with the things that hold us back from our growth, and we're coming into connection and beginning to see what actually is our potential for growth. And we're doing that dance all of the time, learning about ourselves, learning about others. We'll see others grow, and transform before our eyes sometimes. You see this on retreat. You think, wow, they came in like this and they're now like that. Amazing. You'll see others grow and transform, and others will see you grow and transform. And all of that together, you think, wow, what an incredible thing it is to be human. And how can I, be that more and more in the world? And through that, we'll learn to deeply care about others, whether they're Buddhist or not Buddhist, whether they're meditating or not meditating. We'll begin to care passionately about supporting others to grow and develop in whatever context that they are. And this is why it's the whole of the spiritual life, is about how we meet each other in this life. How I meet you, how you meet me, how you meet others. That all of that understanding about how to do that comes from our engagement with others, a conscious engagement with others, but also a kind of conscious engagement with ourselves. This dance between self and other at all times. And I'll end with a quote from our teacher, because it's something we quote a lot. And, I think this quote really encapsulates why spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. And it's a quote that I think it bears a lot of reflection on. So he says, "This is one of the reasons I'm a Buddhist. I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it's possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly believe. This belief is part of my own experience. It's part of my own life. It's part of me. I cannot live without this belief, and I would rather die than give it up. To me, to live is to practice this belief." Thank you. Thank you. Yes, good. Okay, well, I hope it's good to be with you. And yes, I'll be outside if you want to have a chat or ask any questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you online.